I would like to request once again, please come back to your seats as we are about to start with the last working session for the day. Thank you. I would like to request everyone one more time to please come back to their seats as we are about to start with our last working session for the day, which is a special forum on international law. Please settle down, everyone. We are about to start with the last working session for the day, which is a special forum on international law. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now commence with our last session for the day, which is a special forum. Everyone is requested to please return to their seats as we are about to start with the last session. Respected guests, we will now commence with our last session for the day, which is a special forum on international law titled Populism, Nationalism, and the Erosion of International Law. Ms. Maham Naveed, the moderator for the session, is kindly requested to take her seat on the stage. I would now like to request the speakers for the session, Dr. Antonio Sanakopoulos, Professor of Public International Law, University of Oxford, United Kingdom, and Mr. Ehmer Bilal Sufi, Founding President of the Research Society of International Law and Senior Managing Partner, ABS & Co., to please come on the stage and take their seats. The moderator for the session, Ms. Maham Naveed, has served as the Chair International Law at IPRI. She has worked as a consultant at the International Disputes Unit of the Office of the Attorney General for Pakistan, where she was part of the team representing the federal government in landmark international legal cases such as the Indus Waters dispute and the Reko arbitration. In addition, she has worked at the Paris office of the international law firm Sherman & Sterling LLP and has taught as an adjunct professor at LUMS. Ms. Maham, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special forum on international law. I thank you, everyone, for bearing patience and still staying till the end of the last session. So the session today is titled Populism, Nationalism, and the Erosion of International Law. Around the world, we are witnessing a resurgence of populist and nationalist movements that challenge the very foundations of the rules-based international order. When the United Nations Charter was adopted in 1945, it enshrined principles meant to ensure that law, not power, would govern relations between nations. Core principles, including respect for sovereignty, peaceful settlement of international disputes, advancement of human rights, and the pursuit of international cooperation became the backbone of a multilateral system of governance. Yet today, we are witnessing a growing skepticism towards these very ideals. Populist leaders from the global north and the global south have relied on misplaced conceptions of nationalism to advocate for a break away from the multilateral order. This has resulted in an erosion of trust in multilateral institutions, with growing skepticism towards treaties and international legal norms. Whether it is a retreat from global climate change agreements, challenges to international human rights, or the weakening of international trade regimes, the rules-based system is increasingly being replaced by transactional power politics. The danger in such a situation lies in the way that such narratives translate into domestic and international policy. When leaders reject international commitments for short-term political gain, they erode the trust and predictability that the international legal system depends on. These developments demonstrate that when populism and nationalism rise unchecked, they often frame international law as an obstacle rather than the safeguard that it is. It is important to reiterate that international law was never meant to erase sovereignty. Rather, it was meant to channel it responsibly, ensuring that the pursuit of national interests did not come at the expense of international peace and security. In South Asia, these dynamics take a particularly complex form. National identities, historical injustices, and development priorities intersect with international law in unique and sometimes conflicting ways. Whether in questions of borders, refugees, or human rights, the tension between sovereignty and international and regional cooperation remains palpable. It is important to remember history. The rules-based order did not emerge by accident, and it will not survive by inertia. It demands vigilance, courage, and a conviction that law, not power, not fear, must remain the foundation of international and domestic relations. To examine the complex dynamics between populism, nationalism, and international law, we are privileged to have with us today Professor Antonios Xanakopoulos and Mr. Ehmer Bilal Sufi. I will now briefly introduce both participants, and then we will start with speeches from both. Professor Xanakopoulos is Professor of Public International Law at the University of Oxford and Fellow in Law at St. Anne's College. He has taught at universities in Paris, Athens, Bern, and Beijing. Educated in Athens, New York, and Oxford, he is a general international lawyer with publications on state sovereignty, international organizations, treaties, the law of the sea, international dispute settlement, and many more. He advises states and organizations acting as counsel before the International Court of Justice in landmark cases such as the Chagos Islands, Ukraine versus Russia, and the advisory opinion on the occupied Palestinian territory. Professor Xanakopoulos also provides training in international law to judges, diplomats, military officers, and other government officials, including on behalf of the United Nations. He currently serves as the Secretary General of the International Law Association. Our second speaker is Mr. Ehmer Bilal Sufi. Mr. Sufi is a well-known international lawyer from South Asia and former Federal Law Minister of Pakistan. He is currently a member of the ICC Court of Arbitration and has represented Pakistan before the International Court of Justice and other international judicial forums. He has chaired the Advisory Council of Human Rights in Geneva and has also served as the president of WWF Pakistan. Mr. Sufi is the founding partner of the globally ranked law firm ABS & Co. and founder of the Research Society of International Law, a think tank dedicated to promoting international law in Pakistan and the first of its kind. His most recent academic project is the Quran Covenant Research Center. Thank you both of you for joining us today. I would now like to request Professor Xanakopoulos to please give his opening remarks focusing on the rise of populism and its challenges to the rules-based international order. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maham. And of course, many thanks to IPRI for the kind invitation, to the Chair for International Law, to my co-panelists, and of course the colleagues here from IPRI who have been taking good care of me. Khadija and Hazra and everybody else have been made to feel very welcome, which is excellent. And thank you very much for this. Of course, you've given me rather a difficult topic. And one that's very broad. If that's okay with everyone, I'll just do this sitting down because we're supposed to be having a discussion rather than some sort of long remarks. But I have some things to say, sort of in opening. And you rightly said that there are populist leaders that put an emphasis on sovereignty and the will of the people, and sort of like using that emphasis, they frame international organizations or international agreements as constraints to national autonomy or to national will. And they are, of course, absolutely correct, because that is the whole point of international law. The whole point of international law is to constrain sovereignty of states. But of course, there are certain things that we need to note on this. The first thing to note is that that constraint on sovereignty can be either good or bad, depending on where you're coming from, right? So to be very simplistic, certain rules may constrain state power to impose a particular tax regime, or they may constrain state power to introduce certain policies which the government feels is for the benefit of the population, or they may constrain state power to introduce particular economic policies, right, for the benefit of the many. Other rules, on the other hand, may serve to constrain state power to violate human rights, or they may serve to constrain state action to commit atrocities, such as genocide, right, or to use force. The point that I'm trying to make with this is that neither populism nor the rules of international law are in any way neutral. They do come with a particular charge. They do come with a particular political, economic inflection. What I mean by saying that populism is not neutral, we can't, the term itself is one of those sort of, I like to call them weasel words, like they do on Wikipedia. We use the term and everybody says, oh, populism, and then people are going to be like, oh, that sounds bad. And so everybody should be against it. But of course, there can be perfectly good populism, because the way that the term is used, without any specific definition, other than, oh, support for the will of the people, isn't actually helpful at all. Because, for example, in certain areas, they will tell you that it is populist to say that education should be free. Or they say it would be populist to argue that there should be free public transportation. Or it is populist that the rents should be frozen because the cost of living is unaffordable. Or they would say it would be populist, you know, whatever other examples that you can think of. At the same time, it is also populist, or they would say it's also populist, to argue that all refugees and immigrants should be expelled because they're taking our jobs. That's also populist. But you see, or that withdrawal from the WHO is a good thing, right? Or that we should withdraw from climate agreements because that will put strain on the standards of living. So, but these things are all completely different, right? And they can have a completely different charge. So just to label everything as populist, for me, is either lazy or it is actually suspect, right? Something's hiding behind that. Now, with respect to the erosion of international law and the international legal order, that's my second point. International law doesn't actually come from the heavens. It is actually made, like all law, you'll be surprised to find out, is actually something that doesn't exist in nature. We make it. Now, who's we? When it comes to international law, it is states that make international law. They make it through practice, and in particular, they make it through contestation. Like all law, this is a matter of political contestation. What becomes a rule of international law is a matter of a political fight between states. And as usually happens, mostly international law reflects the interests of, yes, you guessed it, the powerful, the former colonial powers, the ones that have been wielding the power in this world. They are the ones whose interests are primarily reflected in most rules of international law. Now, don't be shocked, it's the same in domestic law. It's not the interests of the people that are reflected mostly in domestic law. It's usually the interests of those who made it to political power. That doesn't mean, of course, that the law is not also catering, at least to some extent, for the interests of the less powerful. But that has happened through contestation, through the fact that certain of the less powerful actors have fought for and have gained concessions which are reflected in law, right? So here what we have is the outcome of a fight where the rules of international law in and of themselves sort of reflect that kind of contestation. Some of them are in the interest of the powerful, and some of them are concessions to the less powerful, limitations on the power of the powerful, and so on and so forth. Like you mentioned the UN Charter, 1945. Of course, the UN Charter does contain some concessions, right? Prohibition of the use of force, prohibition of intervention, and what have you. But at the same time, it comes with a very high price. It comes with a very high price of 5 permanent members of the Security Council wielding a veto. It comes with a very high price of the Bretton Woods institutions, which I'm sure you have you are familiar with, right? IMF and World Bank, they impose conditionalities on all sorts of things and so on and so forth. These are part of the price in that sense. So in short, not all of international law is good or bad. There are particular rules that are good, depending on which side of the fence you're on, and particular rules that can be seen as bad. But more importantly than that, international law is not written in stone. Just like it doesn't come from above, it is not written in stone. So when we're talking about erosion, what exactly are we talking about? We are talking about, in reality, you say erosion, everybody fears erosion. If you hear erosion, you'll be like, oh my God, this is horrific. But in reality, what we're talking about is the constant contestation over rules of international law that happen all the time. And of course, if there is no resistance to particular pressures in the development of certain rules, these rules will develop in the direction that they are pushed. And who is pushing them? It will usually be the more powerful states that are pushing for a particular wide interpretation, development of the rules. Let me give you just a couple of examples very, very quickly, and then I will shut up, I promise. But use of force is prohibited in international relations, isn't it? Well, I'm pretty sure you're very aware that use of force does happen. Especially in this audience, it should be familiar to most. Now, of course, here's the problem. Use of force is only supposed to be allowed in response to an armed attack as self-defense. But if for decades we accept powerful states widening the definition of self-defense, talking about self-defense against non-state actors in the territory of a third state without that state's permission, having drones fly all over the territory and target particular individuals because they say, oh, this person the beard is too long, so they look kind of like Osama, so let's bomb him. I have issues with that. I have a beard. My beard is more of a political beard, but it still means that I am targeted at airports, where I'm usually picked out of the line and asked to undergo a random check. And I'm like, yes, I'm sure it's random. It looks very random. But it's not just that, right? Pushes for preventive self-defense. Like, for example, oh, Iran might, in I don't know how many months, years, whatever, develop a nuclear weapon, let's bomb them now. These things are not actually the prevailing interpretation of the prohibition of the use of force. But if they are pushed, and they are constantly pushed, and states don't react to them, they will become the law, because this is how international law is made. If you want another example, let's just take another random example, completely sort of like thought out, not real at all. If you don't react to genocide and war crimes, the prohibitions on genocide and war crimes will weaken. If these things happen and states do not react because of their particular interests, then nobody reacts, then this weakens the prohibition. This is not erosion. I mean, it is erosion in one sense, but this is how international law is made. And if you think that this is peculiar to international law, you would be wrong, because this is exactly the same way that domestic law is made. And in fact, I can give you examples from both the countries that I'm connected to, be it the United Kingdom or Greece, because, of course, as you can tell by my name, I'm not part of the United Kingdom sort of like high classes. But I can give you examples in both these situations where long-standing legal rights have been eroded, have been weakened because of legislative action. It's very simple. Just a few weeks ago in Greece, they passed a law that basically does away with the 8-hour workday, something that has been a legal right for almost a century. And they allowed employers to require 13-hour workdays from the workers. This is shocking, but this is how the law develops. If the people don't react to this, the right goes away. Because rights are not written in stone. Rights are concessions in law, but the fact that they're in law doesn't mean that the law can change. Do you want another example? In the United Kingdom, they have now proscribed Palestine Action, an NGO, as a terrorist organization, which means that there are grandmas and grandpas who go to protests holding little placards that say, I support Palestine Action, and they are imprisoned. They are imprisoned, and this is for the right to protest. In the United Kingdom, the enlightened West, not to mention passing laws that qualify Rwanda as a safe third country, be what may, taking it away from the courts so that we can send refugees to Rwanda. So this is what happens if you don't actually fight for the rights. Now, you heard yesterday, in a talk that I enjoyed very much, Dr. Samshad Akhtar, from the former governor of the State Bank, she said that the international trade rules are currently being rewritten. She is, of course, right. But it's more than that. It's more than trade rules. All of international rules are currently being rewritten. In fact, all legal rules are constantly being rewritten. Unless we are vigilant, they will not be rewritten in our interest. And so here is the question. The question is, do you think that the powerful grant legal rights and legal concessions as charity? The answer is no. The powerful only grant legal rights and legal concessions in response to pressure. And so if we are worried about the erosion of certain international legal rules, then what we need to do, both as states, but also as civil society within our states, is to exert the pressure that is required so that our states stand in defense of those legal rules that we feel need to be defended. So I'll leave it at that for now before I enrage you further, and we can come back with more specific examples for anyone who has the time.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was a very enlightening talk about the rules-based system, how it's created, how it's interpreted through state behavior, and its relationship with populism. We're going to zone in on South Asia with Mr. Emir Bilal Sufi. And sir, we'd like you to comment on the concept of nationalism, sovereignty, and basically the regional cooperation in South Asia and its future.
Thank you very much, Maham. First of all, allow me to thank IPRI, its Board of Governors, and its both presidents. The previous one is also sitting here, the present one is also here. And the reason I thank them is because IPRI is the first think tank in the history of Pakistan which has sponsored and supported an international law chair. So I think we need to give a round of applause to the Inam Saab as well. Inam Saab has been in support mode for this, and this is extraordinary. We do not have a legal chair of international law in any other think tank of Pakistan. Given the nature of interest and the nature of stakes that Pakistan has in South Asia and at global level, awareness of international law is very important. Me, on my part, Research Society of International Law is one thing, but today, based on this positivity in the capital that I see through IPRI, I sense so many faces right in this audience who are beginning to take serious interest in international law. Sadia is sitting, one of the very keen scholar on international law. Majid Saab is sitting, practitioner of intellectual property, Hague Conventions. Danish is here, Foreign Office person who developed keenness for international law. And of course, Shoza Saab is sitting, who has also developed interest and more degrees in training in international law. Ahmed, QCRC, several other young people that I see in the audience. So I think that's a great favor that IPRI is giving to the little community of international lawyers. And of course, the chair himself is sitting there. What I'm trying to say is, Dr. Antonio, that we in this part of the world, this has been traditionally a neglected discipline in South Asia. You are the secretary of the International Law Association. But in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, in Bhutan, there is no coordination of this community, which is very interesting omission, because that demonstrates how people relate with each other, how they communicate with each other on some complex issues that face the region. So this is very interesting omission. We in Pakistan only have the RSIL, then we have the Center of Excellence of International Law in the NDU. In India, we have a much better tradition of research international law society, which was established in 1960s with the premises next to the Supreme Court of India. So they have been involved in training. In Bangladesh, again, there is a general law association that Dr. Kamal used to work on. In Sri Lanka, again, Sri Lanka has produced some top quality international lawyers, and they have been part of the bureaucracy of various international organizations. So what does it all speak? First, that the human resource or the interest in this part of the world has been far less than other parts of the world. To me, that is a contributing factor where we stand today. In terms of tensions, in terms of failing to resolve disputes at a timely level, in terms of failure to speak common language, and then coupled with that, today we have this movement of nationalism and popular approaches which is blended with religious narrative, unfortunately. And that narrative may not be dominating foreign policy as of now, but it is beginning to seriously influence. So the influence can be seen in American politics. Evangelists begin to influence the way Trump administration people think and approach the world. So if they have to extend support to Israel or on Gaza issue, they think it's a religious duty, which is shocking. If you look at Gaza, Israel, and the entire thing, which is your subject in this, when they talk of greater Israel, they are saying it is because we have a covenant in the Bible, and therefore we are entitled to override 1945 UN Charter, something that creates a completely different paradigm. And now in South Asia, we have India, which is again narrative. The foreign policy is being dictated by a religious cultural narrative. We want Akhand Bharat, and we want that Bharat. That's a popular slogan that has been rolled out, and that slogan is developing gradual traction over a period of time. And the traction has come to a point where a little while ago, everyone thought this Akhand Bharat narrative some years back is a highly irresponsible narrative to pick and to pursue. But lo and behold, today, the office bearers, the ministers, those who are associated with the State of the Union of India, they are laying claims over Akhand Bharat as a genuine narrative, as a narrative which is building its own traction. So when they install a map of Akhand Bharat in the parliament venue, they are appealing to popular vote, but at the same time, they are not explaining this to anyone, and neither there is a community in South Asia, in India, in Pakistan, an efficient, effective community which should speak back to such narrative and should tell them, this is a total violation of international law that you are doing. There were certain voices in India when, for example, 5th August 2019, Article 370 and 35A were literally hollowed out, and they claimed title to the entire territory. It was again based on a popular narrative. We will demolish Article 370. Kashmir will be taken by us. And they executed it through a legal instrument. There were voices in India, lawyers, senior lawyers, opposing it, and we were able to put together those set of articles in a small booklet called India Criticizes India, saying, look, Indian lawyers themselves are saying, but the voices were not effective enough. And they were with reference to domestic constitutional framework, not from international framework. So what I'm saying is, ladies and gentlemen, that we are looking and we are experiencing a nationalism as a popular narrative which is beginning to override treaty commitments that states have done. The treaty commitment under the UN Charter is not specific to a regime. It is specific to a state. When a state ratifies any treaty, that commitment continues no matter the regime comes and goes, whosoever is there in power, the state is committed. There is no sanctity for that. The popularity or populism has gone to a point where our good neighbor India has chosen to claim for the first time in recent history, to my knowledge, openly that yes, we are holding in abeyance a treaty that is otherwise governing or regulating the water rights of upper and lower riparian. I do not recall where a state can be so clear and it can be so bold to claim violating a treaty. Normally, when we say other state is violating a treaty, it is often a perception of an adversary. But the other state, which is violating the treaty, innovates interpretation. My interpretation is I can do what I am doing. But India here says, and it is fully backed up by the political ruling party. If you listen to the debates in their parliament, one is shocked. No reference of international law, no reference of treaties, no reference of sanctity which is being attached. So that is creating a very serious threat vis-a-vis other neighboring states. Pakistan is not the only state which they have legal issues or they have issues with China. So while we have line of control, they have line of actual contact with China, which has its own legal problems. They have issues with Bangladesh, whether they were enclave issues, whether it was distribution of the sea boundaries and the law of the sea convention. They have issues with Nepal relating to transit rights, which is guaranteed to a landlocked state by under the 82 law of the sea convention. And this is creating nervousness, a genuine nervousness amongst intelligentsia of the neighboring states, that if this momentum continues and remains unchecked, then what will happen to the commitments pursuant to which this entire territory and boundary issues are there. We already have our share, Durand line issues there. You're talking about the nationalities as well. This region of ours, Dr. Antonio, is home to hundreds of kinds of various clans, tribes, family history. In our part, where you sit today, this country was carved out through a legislative surgery, as I say. So half Punjabis were left on Indian side, half on Pakistani side, half Pathans on the Afghanistan side, Sindhis, Balochis, and Iran, and so on. So there is a centrifuge against it. However, the political forces have come together very efficiently over a period of time. And they have been able to approve, they have been able to negotiate and effectively enter into a covenant that we call the 1973 Constitution that binds the territories of Pakistan. And these territories then have to enforce frameworks. The political parties have to persuade people who follow them. In Pakistan, about 8-9 years ago, there were issues of radicalization. In the previous panel discussion, some discussion was taking place on the issue of radicalization. The state of Pakistan, the political forces of Pakistan have been able to put efforts together to make Pakistanis come across as more responsible state and an ability to honor commitments and treaty frameworks. On the other hand, now you have a completely different scenario in the region. So I believe this is just some points that I can put on the table as an initial comments from my side, and I leave the rest to the question and answers. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
Maybe just not in direct response, but I would like to sort of pay tribute. You said, oh, international law has been left behind in Pakistan and so on and so forth, but we should not forget, and I mean, I'm not pretending to teach anyone about Pakistan here, but this country has a great heritage when it comes to public international law. It has one of the best known judges ever to sit on the International Court of Justice, Dr. Zafrullah Khan, who is also the permanent representative at the United Nations, an excellent scholar, a fighter for decolonization, a supporter of decolonization throughout the world, and somebody who has suffered and was even persecuted at the international stage, even being forced to remove himself from the Southwest Africa cases because of his positions and because of his support for the decolonization movement. So this is truly a deep heritage that Pakistan can refer back to in terms of its international law credentials. That would be one thing to say. And another thing to say is, of course, you're right, so nationalism is such a complicated issue. I think you gave a perfect example of what we call civic nationalism, non-ethnic nationalism, which is what binds Pakistan, but also other countries together. And there is an understanding nationalism, again, is one of those terms that is kind of a weasel word, because people use it, but they mean different things. And in my understanding, civic nationalism, sort of adherence to a particular constitution, something that brings us together as a community because we have agreed to live under some common values and under certain shared rules, is completely different to ethnic nationalism, which says, to take my own country, little myths or big myths, like, for example, we are an uninterrupted line of blood from Pericles and Alexander the Great through today, which of course is not true, right? We all know that where people live, people come in, people come out, everything is absolutely mixed. So the fact that nationalism, and in particular ethnic nationalism, is allowed to be used as a magnet around which people assemble is because we're not dealing with the real problems. These are not the real problems. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, today I want to be an enemy of everyone that I perceive not to be like me. No, in the final analysis, we have this, there was this reference on solidarity, in your text earlier, so international solidarity. Solidarity of whom with whom? Do I have the same interests as Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk? You can rest assured that I don't. Does Pakistan have the same interests as the United States or other countries? You can rest assured it doesn't. Or if it does, it's only in part. We do not have the same interests. So we should gather and be solidary around the interests that unite us. People do not want to be ethnically nationalist. They want good conditions of living. They want equal rights. They want non-exploitation. They want to live like decent human beings. That's what they want. It's when they don't have that, that they are very, very liable to fall for religious extremism, nationalism, ethnic nationalism of that kind, and so on and so forth. Now, don't ask me how to deal with that, because I'm just a lawyer. An IWT dispute I can deal with. I can't deal with these things at length. But they are things to think about in that context.
Professor, I have a follow-up question from something you said about decolonization. So if we talk about that, to what extent do you think then populism is a reflection of the larger global inequalities that have persisted historically?
Yeah, so I think that this is the case. And again, I said populism, like which populism, right? There is not one thing that is populism that's necessarily good or bad. What I would say is the concept of the rules being written and rewritten. Pakistan was not there when the rules were written. Many other states were not there when the rules are written. Now that the rules are being rewritten, is Pakistan going to take its place? Is it going to pressure for the rules to be rewritten in the interest of Pakistan and of other states that have the same interest as Pakistan? Other states that have suffered from colonization, other states that have suffered from people sitting in chairs like mine, coming from countries like mine, telling them, oh, I'm sorry, but the rules say you need to suffer in order for your economy to fit with the prevailing paradigm. And if that causes some of you some pain, you just have to live through the pain. Again, imaginary example, never happened in this conference. And again, if Pakistan does not react to particular pressures, then eventually it will become a rule of international law, something that says, in order not to be attacked, you have to nominate certain people for certain peace awards, or you have to rename your airport as, Zanakopoulos Airport. Let's just use my last name. If these things happen, and the question is, while the rules are being rewritten, is Pakistan and other states going to realize their interest, unite, and prevent the erosion of rules that should be defended, prohibition of genocide, prohibition of the use of force, and erode the rules that need to be eroded. And there are international rules that need to be eroded. I will just say an example. I won't say them now because I don't want to sort of like cause a stir. But I will just remind everyone that in the 60s and 70s, the newly independent states, the non-aligned states, including Pakistan, led the charge for a new international economic order. And they actually managed to change some of the rules. Not all of them. Most of them they didn't manage to change, but they did manage to change some. And they did manage to create some other rules in their interest. But then the whole thing died down because we all fell for the prevailing paradigm, which says someone from the UK is going to come here and tell you what to do with your economy. Or perhaps you can decide what to do with your economy, and then you can convince other states in the area what they should do with their economy, so that you don't actually have to go for the prevailing paradigm all the time. Just a suggestion.
Can I add to this?
Yes, and I have a question, so you can just answer that. That when we talk about like building on with other states in the region, whenever you answer, can you also talk about what role then can regional cooperation play in like kind of combating the negative impacts of populism, particularly in South Asia, like SAARC or other multilateral institutions then?
Yeah, it ties up to what I was trying to respond to him. What Antonio is saying is very interesting. He is saying now that the rules are being rewritten about the global order, Pakistan should be on the table, and so should other developing countries, including South Asia. And I absolutely agree with this, because when the rules were made, as you rightly said, we had some top diplomats who used to lead negotiations and supported by legal teams which would eventually develop momentum. They would lead G77 in certain initiatives. And during those negotiations, one would clearly sense a kind of much more harmony amongst states who were otherwise adverse to each other. There are two categories that you could divide the new rules coming in. One, asserting the rules on which there is no controversy, and the other, the rules that could be controversial. The first category rules are those which are already in place and maybe someone wants to add value to them relating to human rights framework. There is no operational framework, but the substantive framework of human rights in various conventions and covenants exists. Now, if you want to add on to it through another rule, on that broad basis you agree. Rules relating to minerals, for example. Rules relating to regulation of space, for example. Rules relating to regulation of Antarctica and Arctic Treaty, for example. These are the issues on which consensus can be built amongst the developing countries far more easily. But then there could be another set of rules where we could have divisions. Unilateral action framework. In what circumstances Article 51 exception can be stretched? Can it be stretched where there is an argument, a state is unable and unwilling? An argument we heard the echo of about a decade ago, but now again in case of Afghanistan, for example, if someone is unable to control the mischief that is spilling over in a neighboring state, can a victim state then have the right to react? Now, this is a rule that needs to be looked into. Or in circumstances where terrorism is not being controlled and it's creating a mischief, at the moment, the practice of the South Asia seems to be that unilateral action can be undertaken in a proportionate sense. Now, this needs a rule framework. And wherever you can ascertain an effort of the state to curtail that mischief, and yet it escapes. Where the escape is a negligent escape, situation is different. Where the escape of a mischief is deliberate, situation is different. Where the escape of the mischief is completely on account of lack of interest, different. So that is where the division and debate will happen. That is beginning to take place in Russia-China alliance coming together. We saw that in the first panel, partially, where we clearly saw that China and Russia are converging in terms of legal positions. And we saw another evidence in 2016 or 17, I believe, they came out with a joint statement on international law. Very unique thing, not joint statement on cooperation, Javed Sahab, joint statement on international legal principles, arguing that they are trying to build a unique area, a unique dimension. So I think these are the areas, and Pakistan-like countries need to be present in these forums, because that is where the drafts will be hammered, that is where the drafts will be prepared, and those drafts will eventually live. Whether it happens in Shanghai SCO framework, whether it happens in the United Nations, whether it happens in the UN General Assembly framework, we leave that howsoever it's happening. Because, for example, we just saw the Gaza framework. Now it's been converted in the UN Security Council resolution. The draft is being tabled a few hours ago.
Building on to that, Professor, and my question is for you. So, in light of what Mr. Sufi spoken about, do you think that in the coming or near future, just because of the extreme polarization, there's going to be a move towards regionalism, and will that take away from the international system, or do you think that they can tie in together with each other to bring more coherence to the governance?
That's an excellent question. I don't think that one is antagonistic to the other, nor does it have to be antagonistic to the other. There is opportunity. After all, Europe has been doing that for a very long time, right? They have their own regional frameworks and all sorts of things, but they still sort of are part of the international legal order. So when you can achieve regional consensus on particular rules where you can't achieve consensus at the international level, why not start with the regional? Why not regulate those relationships, at least at the regional level, in the first instance? Because over time, that may actually spill over to the international level as well. So we shouldn't see regional developments as antagonistic. Of course, the West is going to see regional developments as antagonistic because they have been dominating international law for a very long time. So whatever regional development is not a regional development in the West, they perceive as a threat to their power and domination over the system. But the two should not be antagonistic, which brings me to the other, this is a wonderful Greek word. You know, I will turn now and tell you how all the words are Greek and all that stuff. So antagonism or competition, right? It's a word that we hear all the time. We've been hearing about it both today and yesterday. Oh, I'm a realist, I don't believe in cooperation, someone said. Or yesterday we were hearing about how Pakistan needs to be competitive and everything's competition and you need to outcompete everybody else. And the question is, why? Why should we live our lives from beginning to end as if we're in a constant race to outcompete everyone else in our lives, be we natural persons or states? Why do we have to live like that? Who said that we have to live like that? Some white Europeans 300 years ago. I'm sorry, but I don't understand it. Why not cooperate? Why do we have to fall into this constant antagonism, competition paradigm without ever questioning it? Who said that it is common sense to live our lives like this? Who said it is common sense to develop the law like this? It's not. Common sense is not common at all.
Thank you. We're going to now take questions from the audience. We're short on time, so please keep your questions very brief and very quick, 15 seconds maximum. We have Brigadier Junjua, and then we have Ambassador Durrani. So yes.
Yeah, my question is about the pace of technology as it impacts politics. Pace is so frenetic that people are now facing identity crisis. They say the train is too fast, we want to get around, get down right here. And their fears of losing their political position, losing their economic position, losing their identity, ethnic identity. So this is creating fear. And this fear is being filled by populists. There's a populist wave, and that populist wave is directly vectored at international law. They do not respect international law because the erosion of international law is in sync with their ideology. So how would the international community evolve a global consensus to protect international law under this implacable wave of populism?
My response will be very brief. First, it would have to protect the people so that they don't fear. Because if you don't protect them from the fear, you will never actually do any. Why are the people in fear? Why? Because we haven't used the legal tools that we have at our disposal to actually protect them from the fear. If you let them be fearful, then of course they will fall prey to nationalists, religious extremists, populists. Nobody wants to live in fear. Now, there are two ways to take away the fear. One is to regulate, to protect them so that they don't fear. And the other one is to tell them about things that will happen in paradise, things that will happen when the whole nation comes together and wins over the other nation, or when we kick out the elite and somehow kick out all the refugees because they're the ones taking our jobs. These are the options here. So the question is, what are we going to do, right? It's not and this is not a question for the experts, this is a question for all of us. How are we working both within the state and at the international level to protect people from fear?
Yeah, I think one thing that I heard from you, which was a very interesting formulation, was AI non-proliferation regime. Brigadier Janjua is also a very good legal mind. I remember his article 20 years ago on Security Council Resolution 1373 printed in a magazine. So his idea of, some sort of a regime to stop proliferation of AI is an ambitious suggestion, but it is something that was being worked towards, and I think Tamina Saiba was part of that negotiations in Geneva, and now these. Something that needs to be done on that to make people realize that irresponsible use of AI has its own cost for individuals, apart from the fact that it destroys the rule of law paradigm as well.
Can we bring the mic over to Mr. Usman Paracha, please?
Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Okay.
All right. And hello, everyone. This is Usman Peracha, the recently appointed chair of international law, taking over from the very able Ms. Maham Naveed. Thank you for the excellent insights. And Emir Bilal Sufi Saab, if I may highlight your role in paving the way for the new generation of international lawyers that we see in this room and in the country. It's only going to do some justice to all that you have contributed in building this profession in our country. My question to the panel is, with regards to the changing landscape that we see in international law, whether we wish to call it an erosion or regression or otherwise, given the difficult way to define how terms may play out, what populism is to one or the other, would customary international law be the right lens to view these changes through and gauge whether the evolution is one that is moving in the right direction or otherwise? Thank you.
Well, I think it is being affected. Now, the presumption of the question of yours and several others' concern is that international law is gone. Just like a spontaneous response for Ambassador Asif Saab, it's become ineffective. Yes, in a certain situation, it has become ineffective. It's actually very tragic. Even for people like us who believe in international law, the way it's been handled, it's absolutely tragic. But having said that, nevertheless, you can sense that continues to be the standard to measure the conduct of the states even today. So if President Trump slaps sanctions, the reaction is that someone has gone to the US Supreme Court to say we are violating our WTO commitments. Whatever we have seen in Gaza, regrettably, now when the people are talking and discussing it together, they are trying to convert it into a legal instrument of the UN Charter Chapter 7 framework. So again, quest for legitimacy is still associated with linking with international law. So I can give you scores of examples where people rely again on principles of international law to argue their positions, howsoever unreasonable they might be. They may say, well, we attack through drones and we can attack anyone through drones. I remember a position evolved by a State Department legal advisor that we will presume there is a conflict situation between an individual and a state, and wherever, and he's a legitimate military target wherever he goes. So you argue, you build an argument, and the whole idea of building an argument from a legal perspective reinforces that there is a norm, there is a rule that exists on which there is a broad consensus. Its implementation always has issues, just the way the domestic law issues. So I think I wouldn't completely lose hope on international law. I would continue, if I were to advise the government of Pakistan, I would say continue to rely on the principles which are there. Look at Indus Water Treaty. What are we left with? Principles of international law, apart from whatever use of force we can contemplate later as things come up. But as of now, the world is with us because it's a violation of international law. And whenever you violate international law, you lose diplomatic support. That's another evidence. So if you are interfering, creating a network to kill individuals in Canada, in US, spying networks in Middle East, spying networks, you begin to lose the traction and you start wondering, why are we left alone? Why we don't have friends? Because people are seeing it, that you are going away from the norm. Howsoever damaged, howsoever dented that norm might be, it stays there.
I have things to say, but maybe we'll pick it up later with regard to the development of customary law.
But we can take the question from Ambassador Jinwar, and then we have a couple of
I
hands
don't know if
here.
this is working. Is it working? Well, thank you very much. Very interesting conversation, and I thank, I decided not to speak earlier, but after Sufi Saab made a mention of me a couple of times, I think it's incumbent on me to do so. Having been involved with the UN processes, and Inam Saab has also been, we've done a lot of work within the UN on international law. Let me underscore the fact, and I'm glad you already almost responded to my question, that it's becoming increasingly difficult to develop international consensus on issues which are even more critical, and for which there is not a need only for government level work, but work at the lawyers level or international jurists level. And that is something which is very greatly required. International Law Commission does help in some ways. There are other parts of the international system that does help in some ways. But getting a resolution or an agreement on anything in the UN right now is very difficult. You look at WTO, what has happened to WTO? It's almost destroyed. It's destroyed because there's one major country that does not want the rule of law as far as trade is concerned, and many other things. There are many other areas where we feel the same kind of frustration as with WTO. But then as Bilal Sufi said that we shouldn't give up. We need to continue to be working on it. But that is something that the youth that are sitting here need to also remember, that every step you take is not easy. And that in the past as well, when the League of Nations disappeared, there was just absolute despair. There was absolute despair. And then the UN came and it did many important and interesting things. So at this point, the UN is unfortunately at the lowest. But the point that you also made, that after all, the US wanted to deal with Gaza in its own way, but is now coming back to the Security Council. What comes out of the Security Council may not necessarily reflect the wishes of the 194 members of the UN, but it will be a little piece. The only unfortunate reality is that the people of Gaza have suffered for 2+ years, and that the world sat and watched them getting killed and destroyed. And there wasn't much that could be done about it. The one country that was totally free to do whatever they wanted to, breaking every law in any law book, continues to so and continues to sort of show its eyes to the world. when you look at Gaza stopped, it's absolutely a heartbreaking situation, and it continues in many ways. So yes, we can't give up on the UN or on lawmaking or on international law, but we need to work, all of us, especially the youth here, need to work very hard to build consensus in areas. IA is one area, laws is one area we've been working on. But what happens every time is that you build something in the UN, European Union goes and develops its own code of conduct. So basically all your rules, your attempt at international law is undermined. So there has to be a meeting of minds or has to be some honesty in the process. Thank you.
Very quick responses because there are many people in the audience.
I will just say that I absolutely agree with you. That was a wonderful intervention, ma'am. The only thing that I have to add is, well, in fact, not add. I've said what I've said. I think we agree for the most part. Remember that international law is a tool that can be used to achieve particular results, and for that you need expertise. And so we need to keep building these expertise, both in Pakistan, and it's wonderful work that is being done right now, but also through the United Nations. And in fact, I wanted to mention that right after Islamabad, I am going to Bangkok for the UN Office of Legal Affairs, where they organize the well-known program of assistance, where we teach diplomats in Southeast Asia. That's the one that takes place in Bangkok. There are in other places also in Africa and in South America with respect to international law, precisely to provide them with the kind of expertise that they need in order to deal with those issues. And the final thing that I would say, because I don't want to go too much into Gaza, it hurts too much, all of us, I think, what is happening there, is to remind that even states that appear to be free to do certain things now, that may not be the case through the passage of time. Because international law, whether we like it or not, does not operate on human scales. It operates more like on geological scales. Things take a while. In 2003, people thought the United States is free to do whatever it wants in Iraq. And now in 2025, you see that this has come at an enormous cost. An enormous cost there as well, but an enormous cost to the United States as well. An enormous cost to the states that undertook unlawful invasion back then as well. So things may take time.
Yes, sir.
There is a very interesting there's a way to look at law. One way is it's dividing, it's getting weak. The other way is to look at, there's a civilizational synergy on certain common issues. Whether they come from culture, faith, or wherever, whatever has been revealed is being legislated as well. The sense of right and wrong in various conventions is almost identical. I see it very interesting. The international conventions relating to crime, for example, Trans-Organized Crime Convention, UN Convention on Corruption, multiple other treaties which create offenses, they draw and they lean on the penal codes of all the states. And the commonality of identifying what is wrong and right is almost there. So I see a civilizational harmony as well on lots of issues that we de-emphasize. We don't seem to identify it. So from scripture to statue, there is a very interesting journey which can bring people together if people are able to make. Regarding the issue, what we can do, there is difference. There's a lot can be done in terms of creating that awareness. The legal community can create that bridge, the legal grid. And as he said, and you also said, what Inam Saab once told me, that when 1982 Law of the Sea Convention was being negotiated, he was one of the chief architects who was leading the developing countries. Americans were opposing it. 82 Law of the Sea Convention, in which you increase the boundaries from 12 nautical miles to 200 nautical miles, EEZ, it was being opposed. Still today, US is not a party, I think. Yet it is enforced. The Deep Sea Bird Authority has come into place. All organizations, court, tribunal, commissions through which we were able to file our documentation to get 350 nautical miles is there. So developing countries are banning. Rome Statute, another example, prime most powerful country in the world saying, no, we don't want that. We don't want the criminal liability in case of war crimes and Geneva Convention. brought into it. Professor Sharif Bisyani and some group of lawyers pushed for it, and now we have an international criminal court. Howsoever it is functioning, it's come up.
Thank you, sir. So we're quickly going to take, a couple of people want to ask questions. So 3 questions together, so you can answer that. Then I have one last question, and then we're going to wrap up the session. Can we have the mic here, please? Thank you.
Sir, Dr. Antonius, my question is from you, sir. Taking lead from what you have said, that international law is basically protecting the people, while the domestic law protects the powerful in a country. From that point, and what you have just mentioned, that it takes time for justice, for international law to take its course. And the example given by you is basically, it spans over a period of, say, 20 plus years to get to that justice. Taking lead from that one, sir, I think the Gaza genocide has shaken the basic belief in the protection promised by the international law, especially through the law of armed conflict. If you see it from that prism, all the principles, or maybe majority of the principles of international law from LOAC have been violated in this conflict. My question is, how would this trust be restored? Are we going to rewrite the international law that it would protect next time, and it can harness such kind of a atrocity which takes place? Are we going to do it by accountability? What is the course which will be taken? Thank you.
Thank you. Over here, like, this side, please. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. This is Zohaib. Sir Antonius, I have a question, very simple question. There is no doubt that international law played a significant and crucial role in maintaining global order and security. However, whenever want an aggressor state like India they carry out a false flag operation like Pulwama and Pahalgam, and then use it as a pretext to attack Pakistan without the investigation of a neutral expert and United Nations. Doesn't this highlight a major loophole in international law? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And can we have the gentleman here, please? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Abdur Rafi. I'm students of economics, and I'm passionate about international law. So I have a question that you've talked about that international law is not is written on stones, but it is developed by different societies, and when countries react to war crimes. So I have a question, why there's a polarity between war crimes of Russia and Israel? Thank you.
Perfect. So, why is there... I think both of you can take like very quickly 30 to 40 seconds to answer that.
So some of the questions, obviously, I can't answer, and I'd rather not go into specifics, but I will take the question that was asked, which I think is good, in terms of it takes long for justice to prevail, so what I said earlier. I think if you tie it back to what I was saying in my first remarks, you will see how this works. What happens is international law, we had Usman earlier talking about development of customary international law. How is customary international law developed? Customary international law is a general practice, the practice of states, that is accepted as law, right? I'm saying this for the non-lawyers in the room. So what states do, if it is accepted as law, it becomes the law. Now, states are doing things all the time. And the question is, will what they do become the law, or will we treat it as a violation? And treat it as a violation in perpetuity. That means defend the existing rule rather than the new rule that they're trying to do. So the response to violations of rules of armed conflict that have been violated, the response to violations of the prohibition of genocide, the response to violations to prohibitions of the use of force, on the part of those states who actually value those rules and who do not want to see those rules disappear, is to keep treating those actions as violations of the law. It's only that that will stop those actions from becoming the new law. And I cannot stress this enough. So it is up to all states to defend the existing rules if they value them by protesting their violation. Protesting their violation does not necessarily mean, in fact, it cannot mean taking forcible action, but it can mean something as simple as standing up in the United Nations, in other multilateral fora, in bilateral relations, and keep raising the issue that you or your allies have been violating international law. These are the violations. We protest them, and we will be protesting them in perpetuity. Because if we don't, they will become the new law.
Yeah, I entirely agree. The idea of a persistent objector is very important. If you want to oppose any norm which is being evolved, or you detect things being violated, must object. Note verbal has to be issued. Formal intimation to the entity which is governing that area, whether it is ICAO, whether it is IAEA, whether it is under conventions, any other convention, that needs to be informed that state X, state Y is committing a violation of the law that they have themselves signed from your point of view, so that you are able to. Similarly, those states which are like-minded in our region, coming back to, let's say, SAARC, for example, is a body which is being made less functional because of our close neighbor. But the remaining states can reactivate it, find a way to create a new agenda. I mean, there are so many common agendas apart from human rights and other matters are there which can be laid. But countering radicalization trends could be a common agenda of all these states which are in SAARC, even if India is not coming on board. Issues relating to protection of the boundaries or developing consistent principles for boundary approaches, because boundaries are a common dispute amongst all SAARC states. Likewise, distribution of sea resources with landlocked states. We have Afghanistan and Nepal, two landlocked states. They have a certain degree of rights under Law 82 Convention. That commonality can come together. And of course, if there is a state which is saying, we want to expand our frontiers, well, the affectees naturally become an alliance. They naturally become allies. They should become allies, and they should formalize this based on the fact that we are being threatened of the use of force by our neighbor, which is an utter violation of his own commitments. So I think that alliances need to be re-looked into, and based on that, we can move together more in greater harmony.
I think that is a very good summing up of all three questions. I have a last question, which is from a very special member of the IPRI team, Maisha. She's 14 years old, and Dr. Neil's daughter, who's texted me a question because she really wants an answer. So as just the fact that it's a young person and really interested in international law. So she's asking, what role do international institutions play in resisting the nationalist backlash against global governance, and how is the future going to be shaped by it? So, and it's a 14-year-old asking that question, so I think we really need to answer that very quickly.
That is an impressive question that I am not sure I am able to answer fully. I'm sorry, but what I can say is international institutions need to be representative, and in particular, representative of the people in order to fight that nationalist backlash. So we need to find faith in international institutions, because they are the institutions that we have created to protect us. If we feel that the United Nations is actually our creation, we have ownership, it belongs to us, it is there to protect us to the extent that it can, then it will be a rallying call, a rallying position for everyone to unite against nationalism, against these types of problems that basically seek to divide us. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, but I would definitely thank you for your question, and when you're ready to answer that question yourself, come to Oxford and write a PhD on it.
that brings us to a close to today's session. Thank you, everyone. I am going to now hand it over to Ikra.
Thank you so much, everyone, for such an enlightening discourse. I would now like to request President IPRI to please present mementos to the speakers and the moderator. Starting with Dr. Antonio Sanakopoulos. Mr. Ahmer Bilal Sufi. Ms. Maham Naveed. Ladies and gentlemen, before we formally conclude today's proceedings, it is my absolute honor to invite Ambassador Inamul Haq, Chairman Board of Governors of the Islamabad Policy Research Institute, to share his concluding remarks and reflections on the 2 days of deliberations at the Margalla Dialogue 2025.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We have had 2 days now of very intense discussions spread over all 8 sessions, I think. And at this time of the evening, the synapses of my brain are snapping. I'm not quite sure what is your situation, but if you're feeling well enough, then I will impose a few more minutes on your time. The topic of this seminar was very interesting: future of the global order, cooperation or confrontation. We are all tired, and I have no intention of undertaking the impossible task of either summarizing the discussions or drawing any conclusions from them, because the speakers were such eminent people that it would be presumptuous on my part to do so. The IPRI team will be preparing a detailed report on the dialogue, which will be widely disseminated. So I will confine myself to a few sentences on the global order. What is the global order that we have today? The global order was brought into being at the end of the Second World War in 1945 by the victors of the World War. It was followed by a period of Cold War, and then we are now still living, I believe, in a unipolar moment, with the United States as the sole superpower. Over these years, the system has been undergoing a metamorphosis, and by now, the principles of law or international law or norms of behavior which were established in 1945 have been upended, ignored, or openly flouted, both in the political as well as in the economic arena. As you know, when the victor of a war writes a document, they always build in certain safeguards. So when they were writing the UN Charter, they created the Security Council to maintain international peace and security. And in that, they entered 5 permanent members. Who were those 5 permanent members? United States, US, UK, France, Russia, and China. And they gave themselves the right to veto. So ab initio, the United Nations could not take any action against any of these states in terms of peace and security without their consent. And whenever any of their interests or any of the interests of their close friends have been impacted, they have resorted to the use of veto. So in a way, the United Nations was born rather lame and weak. And having born weak, it has become irrelevant over the years, except perhaps as a stage for an annual parade of leaders from all over the world, preening and strutting for a few minutes, spouting inanities for the benefit of the poor folk back home, and to which nobody in the world pays any attention. But let me not denigrate the United Nations, having been posted there 3 times during my career. The United Nations has a number of institutions and specialized agencies which are doing very good work and should continue to be allowed to do that work. But the UN, the victors also created an economic system. They created the World Bank, the IMF, and the GATT, G-A-T-T, the General System of Trade and Tariffs, which has been replaced now by the WTA, TO in 1996. And that has, over the year, given them the ability to manipulate, and when they can't manipulate it, to make it ineffective, the economic system of the world. And in that economic system, the United States already was the preeminent state of the world. Because within the 2 major organizations, IMF and the World Bank, they had the number of votes where they could exercise a practical veto on every decision of the IMF and the World Bank. And of course, the Western countries were supportive of the United States. So therefore, no decision could be taken in any of these international fora without the consent of the West, and particularly the United States. Now this system has come to a state where a challenger has emerged, China. The US official policy is that it will not allow a challenger to emerge to its preeminence in the world. However, that may have undergone a rethinking or rechange. Because recently when Mr. Trump met President Xi in South Korea at the APEC summit, he called it a meeting of the G2. Now, G2 is a term which has been in use for a number of years, referring to a condominium between the Americans and the Chinese to control the rest of the world. But is China willing to become a member of the G2 or not? If you ask Professor Gao, China will refuse to become a member of the G2. It wants a GW, a group of the world. But what will in effect emerge? Over the years, as we have seen, democracy is on the retreat in many democratic countries as well, and authoritarian rulers have emerged in the major countries of the world. Look at the United States. Trump is ruling like a king. President Xi is a strong man in China. Putin has been the undisputed ruler of Russia for more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades. Then there are India, of course, has Mr. Modi. Hungary has Orban. Turkey has Tayyip Erdogan. Brazil has had, but he's lost the election, Mr. Bolsonaro. So what is going to emerge if the four most powerful countries of the world have authoritarian rulers? Will they subject themselves to any particular organized rule of law? Or will they continue to go their own way and continue to flout international law, as we have seen them doing? India did that recently in May. Trump is doing that by blowing out boats in Venezuela and threatening others with dire consequences. What is the third possibility? A religion-based division. The Jews are looking at a greater Israel, wanting a greater Israel. The Hindus want an Akhand Bharat. And Mr. Trump has now taken up the cause of Christianity because he has threatened Nigeria recently that because of the killing of Christians in Nigeria by Muslims, he will bombard Nigeria or attack Nigeria. Recently, when the South African president was visiting the White House, Mr. Trump took him to task because white Afrikaners were being mistreated. So a white supremacist Christian evangelist group is also emerging. Will they form a kind of a coalition? We talk of multipolarity. What would multipolarity entail? How many poles will be there? The situation is murky. And many of these authoritarian rulers, and particularly Mr. Trump, talks of spheres of influence. And he is in a way prepared to grant Russia its own sphere of influence, perhaps China its own sphere of influence, and obviously the United States will have its own sphere of influence. And the policies of the United States have since long been overbearing, unilateralist, riding roughshod over international norms and international law and over other countries. But internally also the United States is becoming a dystopia. ICE agents are roaming the streets wearing masks and capturing people, young people either getting their degrees from universities or people working whether illegally or legally. He's sending the National Guard to major cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and others, which are democratically controlled, but he wants as a show of power to show the world, to show his own people, the Republicans, that he can do whatever he wishes to the Democrats. He also recently, when he was addressing the 800 generals, said that the army should be training within America against civilian insurgents or those civilians who were committing crimes. So what is it trying to bring into focus within the United States? Is it planning to do away with democracy within the United States and seek a permanent status as a president or maybe as a king? We will see what happens. But what I want to do now is to see what do we gain out of this seminar. What does Pakistan do in a situation in which the most powerful countries of the world are not respecting international law? And in one way, Pakistan has also followed that principle. For example, Mr. Modi had adopted the new normal that if there is a terrorist attack in India India will reserve the right to attack Pakistan without necessarily conducting any due investigation. And we have told Afghanistan that if terrorist attacks in Pakistan continue, we will attack Afghanistan, the hideouts of terrorists, etc. That is what India claimed that it did in May. So are we now following in the footsteps of those countries which are breaking international law? And as our distinguished professor from Oxford said, non-state actors are going to be hit in third countries without any proof. And he gave the example of Osama bin Laden, who was hit in Pakistan. So where do we stand on this issue? We should clarify our own position also. But let us look at the general situation in Pakistan. We have discussed many things, but we have not discussed the fundamental problems in Pakistan. And the basic problems, to my mind, are two or three. One is our 2.5% growth of population and our inability to either control that growth or to develop fast enough to provide jobs to the youth who are coming on the job market, or to even educate them properly. For example, perhaps we could take the lead from the West and establish some STEM universities where the only subjects taught are science and technology, engineering and mathematics. Somebody suggested we could use arts to them also, but I think for the time being, STEM would be good enough for us. And those who cannot go to the universities for higher education, we should have sufficient arrangements for vocational colleges and schools to make them skilled and productive labor. We have done nothing of the sort. Instead, what do we have? We have different systems of education. Nobody wants to go to a public or a government school. People go to private schools and pay exorbitant fees. I did 16 years of my education in perhaps 1,500 rupees or less. Today, the per month fee of a young student, maybe in the 5th class or 4th grade, is about 50,000 rupees if they go to a good private school. Why can't we improve our government schools enough? And perhaps one way would be to force all bureaucrats and all politicians to send their own children to the government schools. Then they will also provide good teachers to them. Instead, what we have done is we have allowed the mullahs to capture our education system also. Today there are, I was reading recently, almost 100,000 madrasas in Pakistan. Take a very conservative figure. If they produce 10 religious graduates per year also, and I'm taking the minimum possible figure, most of them produce 100 or 150. We will have 1 million Maulvis at our hand per year. And what are those Maulvis going to do? They're going to preach to you. Because they have done Dars-e-Nizami. They don't know any secular subjects. They cannot become useful members of an economy of today. They can tell you what the Holy Book says, they can tell you what the Ahadith say, but they cannot tell you how to earn your living. And they themselves, what do they do themselves? They go and capture a mosque. One of them becomes a muazzin. One of them becomes a leader of the prayers. One of them becomes a khatib. and one or two of them become the cleaners. And most of the mosques then open another madrasa. And they go around collecting funds with which they keep the madrasa running and also their own households running. So this has become an industry. Should we not stop that industry? Does any government in Pakistan has either the capacity or the courage to put an end to this madrasa system and to streamline them and to bring them into mainline education? And to top all that, we have handed the pulpit to the mullahs. Islam does not give the right to any private individual to start preaching whatever he wants to. And many of these mullahs preach violence. In many Muslim countries, like Turkey, for example, and in many others, the government of the day, even in Saudi Arabia, the government of the day provides the khutbah to each mosque. And the khatib just reads out that khutbah and nothing else. And if any messaging has to be done by the government, it is done through that khutbah, which serves both as a messaging medium, also as a religious medium. Do we have the courage to do that? And if we do not, which way are we headed? More violence, more terrorism, more radicalism, more extremism, and young people who do not have sufficient education to find jobs will turn to crimes. So we are headed towards anarchy, and we should be careful about that. On the economy yesterday, our session was very interesting. All the speakers were very learned. They knew all the problems and they knew all the solutions. But none of them, including the distinguished advisor to the Prime Minister on Economic Affairs, Mr. Haroon Akhtar Khan, was prepared to do anything about it. They told us that the agriculture sector does not pay any taxes, the retailers do not pay any taxes, the 25% of the population does not pay any taxes, the FBR has to collect taxes only from 50% of the people, and out of 70 million people who can pay taxes, only 5.9 million people pay taxes. Is it our responsibility to collect taxes, or is it the government's responsibility to do so? Why do they keep spouting these figures at us? What is the government supposed to do if it is not to collect taxes? And what do they do? Those who are already paying taxes, their taxes are increased every year. The salaried people are perhaps the most heavily taxed people. The petrol levies have gone up to 60 rupees per litre. And I saw a very proudly projected news item that the government has collected 371 billion rupees from the start of this year's budget till now. And their hope, this was 100 billion rupees more than they collected last year. So they take the easy way out. Since there's nothing you can do except pay the price at the petrol pump. You have to pay the levy, and they will keep increasing the levy. And we will continue to suffer. Those who pay their bills are inflated, whether it is electricity or gas or water or anything else. Those who do not can go scot-free. So there is an urgent need of reform within ourselves. We know what that reform has to be, but we are in the grip of an elite capture. Which are the sectors of the economy which are most heavily subsidized? It is the agriculture sector, where water that is supplied to farmers, and I'm talking of large farmers, does not even pay 20% of its maintenance costs. And it is given practically free so that they can do flood agriculture, they can flood their fields for as much water as they want to. Secondly, we very wisely decided that all tube wells would be solarized. Now, most of the large farmers have put their tube wells on solar energy, so they don't have to pay any bill to the government. And our underground water resources are being so quickly depleted that most of our fresh potable water is going to come to an end much quicker than the glaciers are going to melt. And the glaciers are melting quite fast also. I think perhaps we should be discussing these issues. I will not bore you any further, so let me come to the conclusion and allow me to offer our deep thanks and appreciation to all the scholars, thinkers, and academics who devoted time and effort to prepare their presentations in different sessions and also participated and enriched our discussions. We are grateful for their presence. And to our guests who came from abroad, we bid bon voyage and hope that we will see them again in Pakistan. We hope we were able to make their stay in Pakistan enjoyable. I would also like to thank all of you who attended this dialogue, and particularly those who asked penetrating questions from the speakers, thus showing their great interest in and knowledge of the subjects being discussed. Our thanks are also due to the helpful management and staff of the Marriott Hotel for the services provided during the Margalla dialogue. And finally, I would ask all of you to join me in a vote of thanks and deep appreciation to the President of Islamabad Policy Research Institute, Lieutenant General Majid Ehsan, particularly, and Dr. Rashid Janjua and Brigadier Nadeem and other of their colleagues, and the entire team of IPRI for their valuable contribution to and for the meticulous and impeccable logistic arrangements so essential for the successful holding of the dialogue. Let's give them a very warm round of applause. The Margalla Dialogue 2025 is adjourned. We will meet again, inshallah, in the next edition of this ongoing conversation in 2026. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Ambassador Inamul Haq, for your insightful and inspiring words. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the Margalla Dialogue 2025. On behalf of IPRI, I extend our deepest appreciation to all the guests, speakers, and participants for being with us over the past 2 days and for sharing your invaluable insights and perspectives. Thank you once again. All the team members from IPRI are requested to gather